Welcome back to the Nano Cruising Podcast. I'm your host, Stefan Marceau. Can you believe we're already at episode 41? Sometimes I don't pay attention, I just do it, and then I realize, wow, it's been a year and a half, we're episode 41. Thank you everybody for the support for this podcast and spreading the word about small boat cruising. Today we talk to Dan Rubinstein and his travels on an SUP, his cruising in an SUP. Let's get to that. So today's guest didn't just dream of an adventure. He stood up for it, literally. Dan Rubinstein is the author of Waterborne, a book about his long-distance journey in a stand-up paddleboard. So welcome, Dan. Thank you for joining us. I was really looking forward to talking to you. I guess first we'll start with setting the scene, I guess. Tell me about, before we get into the trip, what's your background with paddling and the outdoors, and were you always drawn to the water? Maybe just...
Hi, Steph. Great to meet you and talk to you, and thanks for having me on the show. No, I haven't always been this drawn to the water. I grew up in Toronto. I'll confess that I grew up in Toronto, but I haven't lived there for nearly 30 years, right. And I don't ever want to live there again. So no offense to Toronto. It's my home. My family's there, but there's better places to get to nature than a big city like that.
Right.
I did some canoeing and some camping growing up and, spent a fair bit of time outdoors. But it was only 10 years ago that I tried paddleboarding for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And I've lived in Ottawa for about 17 years now. Mm-hmm. And it was just renting a SUP at a provincial park at Bon Echo Provincial Park.
Beautiful place.
Yeah, we had started to see them in the city, on the Ottawa and Rideau rivers and Rideau Canal. To be honest, my wife and I kind of made fun of paddleboards. They look kind of ridiculous, but something made me really want to try it. So I rented a board at Bon Echo, and it was love at first paddle.
Wow.
I love that I could, most of all, jump in for a swim and climb back on. It's hard to do that in a canoe or a kayak. Mm-hmm. I loved looking down into the lake and seeing fish and turtles and plants. I loved the way my body was free to move around while paddling. I feel somewhat, kind of confined or restricted when you're seated in a canoe or kayak. Although some of my best friends are canoers or kayakers, so that's an okay form of paddling too. But I just fell in love with it right away, and that was, like I said, about 10 years ago, and it's been kind of full tilt ever since. Paddling a lot, learning a lot about paddleboarding with some great teachers. Getting different types of boards and then paddling in different conditions, from flat water to white water to surfing on waves in the Great Lakes or the ocean or river waves. We have some great standing waves for surfing here in Ottawa, which you can do on a surfboard, a kayak, or on a paddleboard. So it's been nonstop. And I've lived across Canada. I've lived in half a dozen cities. They're all on either a river, a lake, or the ocean. Nice. But I never owned a watercraft until living here. And having a paddleboard gave me just easy and intimate access to water. And I just fell in love with the ability to get on a board and be on the water here or wherever I am.
I think one thing reading it I found really cool, and I never even thought about it, paddleboard, you can take that anywhere, you can go on. You take it on a transit and go with you anywhere. I can't do that with a canoe, a kayak, or windsurf, or a boat, really. So you can decide to go pretty much wherever you want, fairly easily. I think it's, you don't think about that, but it's true. It's very flexible for that, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So in my early days of paddling, one of my favorite things to do on the Ottawa River is to take a bus downtown to pump up an inflatable paddleboard. And especially in the spring when the water's fast, you can do a run. It's about 35 kilometers to a place called Petrie Island. And if the current's fast, it's just a super fast, fun ride. Nice. And that's the last place that the public transit serves. So you get off the water, you deflate your board, you roll it up, you put it on your back, and you catch a bus home. You can do kind of one-way shuttle trips.
That's so cool.
The board I used for the trip that my book was about was a 14-foot inflatable made by an amazing company out of Colorado called Badfish. Mm-hmm. And it's a 14-foot long touring board. Can talk more about the specs later, but I like to say that it's an ocean-going vessel. Like you can take this into some big water, but then you could get it on your back and take the subway. You know, I was walking through Times Square in New York City with my ocean-going vessel on my back. So, as you said, it's hard to do that with a canoe or a kayak or a sailboat.
Right. So, tell us about the journey itself, the route you took, and so on, and what made you chose to actually do this.
Good question. Yeah. So, I mean, the more I paddled, one of the beautiful things about being a nonfiction writer is you can combine your hobbies, your passions, and your work, your craft. Mm-hmm. So not only was I paddling a lot, I was writing magazine articles about paddleboarding. Right. And that led me into this idea of blue space. So blue space is essentially the aquatic equivalent of green space. It means being in, on, or around water. And there's a lot of really cool research that speaks to just how good it is for our bodies, for our minds. It makes us want to take better care of the planet. It encourages cross-generational play. Being in blue space is so good for us. So I wanted to explore blue space and paddleboarding kind of together in a project. And, the best way to kind of tell a story is to go on a trip, to go on an adventure. And as much as I love, flying somewhere exotic to paddle, and I've paddled in Belize and in the Great Bear Rainforest, I also love exploring the wilderness and nature in our own backyards. I live in Ottawa. You hop on the Ottawa River, and Montreal's downstream. You hang a right, catch the Hudson in New York City. And then if you have an inflatable, you can take the bus back up the Hudson to Albany, New York, hop on the Erie Canal, 353 miles, paddle to Buffalo. And then you're kind of near Lake Ontario, which will take you to the Rideau Canal system and back home. So right. I saw this loop of navigable waters in my own backyard. There's two other kind of quick layers on top of that. One is that when my mother's family immigrated from Eastern Europe, they took a boat to Montreal. They were met at the port by relatives who had come earlier, who were living in New York. So they brought them down to New York. Parents got married. My mom met my dad in New York. They were ready to start a family, and they moved to Toronto, which is where I was born and raised. So Ottawa, Montreal, New York, and Toronto connects kind of the cities where my family has roots in North America. Right. And then lastly, I'm a journalist. I need people to talk to. It's a really populated part of the continent. So they would be people everywhere. So it kind of had everything I needed to tell a good story about blue space and paddling.
The blue space you're talking about, maybe it's probably a good idea to talk about it. I'm a big believer in being in nature. That's my religion, being in nature. We're so disconnected from the real world, walking nature, being on the water. But in your book, your research has found out that blue space is actually better than green space, which I didn't quite realize. So it's pretty amazing. So even better.
Yeah. And these are serious, like peer-reviewed, studies that have thousands of respondents asking questions, or even doing like measures of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, heart rate measures, and exposing people to different environments. And time after time, they see that when you're in blue space, it's so much more psychologically restorative than even other outdoor natural environments are. Lots of the caveats, blue space can be dangerous and deadly. Drowning is a risk. People who are struggling socioeconomically are more exposed to the harms associated with water, like flooding and intense storms, and waterborne diseases. And then access to the beauty of water is also inequitably distributed. But if you can get to water and it's a healthy aquatic ecosystem, it does so much for us. And the kind of the nugget or kernel that I'm really drawn to, as one of the environmental psychologists I spoke to told me, when you're on water, when you look into the horizon on a lake, you get a sense of extent, of boundless possibility. But at the same time, because water is such an intrinsic part of who we are as a species, it's the majority of our bodies. We're floating in utero in a liquid that's mostly water. So at the same time as you're kind of sensing that anything's possible, you feel comfort and belonging. You feel home. So it gives us this really kind of amazing state where we're happy and content, but also see the possibility of change. And that's a really powerful feeling and does so much for our brains. We tend to be more active when we're around water as well. So that's good for our bodies, right? It makes us happier. And, so anecdotally, we know, you go to a new city or town and you want to go to the river or the lake. You want to check out what the beach or the landing or the dock is. There's a reason why we're drawn to the water. It's part of who we are. It's a huge part of who we are.
Right. I'm in agreement. I'm always joked, Earth is, I don't know the number exactly. Earth is what, 75, 80% water, and we're 65 or 70. I said, I don't think there's a coincidence there. I think there's reality. We're connected really. So that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I read a line. There's a Anishinaabe author, a Canadian, Leanne Bedasamasake Simpson, and she wrote a book that came up recently called Theory of Water. And she writes that, you're breathing out water droplets. The people beside you are breathing in your water droplets. So basically, water is literally connecting us to everybody around us. It escapes the container. You can't confine it, right? It's kind of like a lifeblood that connects everything on the planet. Human, animal, plant, everything needs and has water to survive.
Fascinating. And I also like the way, as you're going through the Hudson, for example, the Hudson was obviously a very industrial area and water forgotten, but there's a renewal, which we don't realize necessarily. There's a big renewal and all along the way to kind of revitalize first, to not make it toxic anymore, but to revitalize and make it a place where people can go. So that was great to see and hear.
Yeah, I mean, as recently as the 1960s, it was considered a dead river. They say that you could tell what color the cars were being painted in some of the auto factories by looking at the Hudson. And if it's red, the red cars are coming off the line today, right? And it was local people. It was fishers and blue collar workers, a lot of military veterans and factory workers who realized, this river, this thing that they're drawn to in their communities was being poisoned and polluted, and nobody was going to save it other than themselves. So they kind of got busy, rolled up their sleeves, got to work, got active politically, protested. The North American environmental movement was essentially born in the Hudson Valley when people realized that they had to take care of business themselves.
Right.
And legislation was passed, the Clean Water Act in the U.S. and laws that allowed people to sue polluters and shut them down and recoup damages. It came from there. And now, 50, 60 years later, it's a remarkably healthy, biodiverse ecosystem. You can eat most of the fish now. You can swim in it most of the time. It doesn't smell anymore. It doesn't take on the color of cars being painted. So it's amazing, kind of story of rebirth and resilience. And that happens in waterways and rivers everywhere. The Ottawa River was polluted. The Rideau River was polluted. And now, sure, there are issues with some industrial pollution, with stormwater runoff, with agricultural chemicals sometimes. But for the most part, they're clean and healthy. There's a lingering perception that taints them a little bit. A lot of people I know in Ottawa don't want to swim in our rivers. Mm-hmm. They test them. Most of the time, they're perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. And that's because people kind of woke up in the 60s and 70s and realized, we have a chance here to reverse the damage that we've caused.
It's a great story because a lot of times people in the environment, they get a little, I won't say depressed, but a little down about, what the impact is and how we can help. But this is you see a story where, humans, when they get together, they decide to even, not to fix everything, but to fix the little things a little bit at a time. It does add up. So that's, I really enjoy reading that portion. Definitely.
It's fun that you say that. There's one of the places I stopped, the Champlain Canal connects Lake Champlain to the Hudson River. And in a little town in New York State, Schuylerville, there's basically an island between the rapids and the waterfall and the canal channel, where it was canals for boats to go through. And it was a dumping ground. It was polluted. It was in really rough state. And it was essentially a few locals who, again, rolled up their sleeves and said, let's make this a park. And they hauled out truckload after truckload of garbage. They did landscaping. They got money to build playgrounds and pavilions. And the woman who runs a nonprofit that runs Hudson Crossing Park in Schuylerville, she said to me, I can't solve all of the problems in the world, but I can solve some of the problems where I live. And if more people had that attitude, the spirit of community, of volunteerism, of turning the clock back on pollution, that goes a long way. And it's and not only is this park an amazing place, it's played a significant role in the resurgence of the entire community. Right. And it's become a really healthy, diverse, kind of beautiful town to be in. And having this gathering place is a big part of that. It brings people together outdoors, and they realize they have things in common with one another because they're in a shared public space.
Let's talk about the I guess the technical side of it, maybe I'm sure everybody is curious to see how what you carry. We don't know. I don't know anything about paddleboard, so maybe you can give us. So if somebody who wants to get started and wants to do a little trip like that, not a huge one, but where would you recommend? Where would we start? I mean, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't start with what I did. I would work your way up to it. To provide some context, so my first overnight trip, back when I did not know what I was doing, I took a train from Ottawa to Smith Falls and paddled back over 2 days. I had a 10.5 foot long inflatable paddleboard. I had a heavy aluminum paddle from Canadian Tire.
Right.
I had an Airbnb book in Kemptville.
Okay.
And I the first day I had probably been on the water for 10, 12 hours. It was 9 p.m. It's getting dark. And to get from the Rideau to Kemptville, you have to go up Kemptville Creek. And so it's June. I turn up the creek. I got about an hour, 4 or 5 kilometers to go. What happens in Ontario in June at dusk? The mosquitoes totally attacked me. And I had not even thought about that once while planning. So I did not have bug spray. And I realized really quickly that I was stopping and scratching and slapping. And I realized if I'm doing that, I'm not paddling and I'm not going to get there until God knows when. So I had to kind of just mind over matter, forget about the bugs. And it was funny, but it worked. Like I was able to stop thinking about the bugs and made it. So that showed me how powerful paddleboarding can be. It can make you forget about Ontario springtime dusk mosquitoes.
Wow.
But yeah, so first of all, if you're going out that time of year, that time of night, bring bug spray. That would be my first tip. I would start small. If you want to do an overnight trip, one night is fine. Inflatable paddleboards are great.
Yeah.
They have a lot of volume and buoyancy, so you can carry a fair bit of gear.
So you have dry bags you attach, I guess, to the board somehow. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Dry bags just in case. Another beautiful thing about paddleboarding compared to canoeing or kayaking is you can't really capsize. You can fall in, but you should be leashed to the board. And if the water's cold, you should be wearing either a dry suit or a wetsuit. And worst thing that happen is you just get back on the board, right? So yeah, your gear's in dry bags. Most inflatables have tie down straps. If you're going to be in dynamic conditions, rapids or waves, wind, I would clip the dry bags to the straps. That way your boards don't drift away if anything happens. It's really helpful to have some technique. So, I was fortunate to learn from some great paddleboard instructors.
So take a course is probably a good way to start.
Yeah, just a basic paddle stroke is helpful, just to learn the key steps in the paddle stroke, some safety stuff, what, hazards to look out for in moving water. Rivers can be tricky. If there's logs or rocks, you don't want to snag your leash or foot entrapment could be an issue if it's really fast water. So basic safety knowledge, basic technique, and then the right equipment. And for a short trip, you don't really need a fancy board or paddle or gear. You just need to be able to move. And, be realistic, right? Like, do 8 kilometers and take your time and pick for a nice weather window, right? Don't drop your phone in the water so you have a lifeline if you need it. Yeah.
Guilty.
Miraculously, in this whole trip, I was paddling for about 11 weeks. I did not drop my phone once, and it was how I was coordinating everything. It was my lifeline, so I was quite careful with it. But I mean, I think, and you can, obviously you're gonna pare down your gear. You can bring a fair bit of stuff in a canoe or kayak or a small boat.
Right.
On a paddleboard, I had about like 60 pounds of gear, so it was enough. And I had like extra clothing because I wanted to look presentable in some places, and I had some journalist equipment and stuff like that. I had enough food to get by for a couple days, but there were cities and towns to restock in. But I wanted to keep my kit kind of pared down enough so that if I had to, I had 3 dry bags, and then the paddleboard goes in a big bag on your back. I could get from A to B in one shot, carrying all my gear really slowly and painfully, but I could do kind of portages in one stop. So, but yeah, I would just, pick a simple route, know what you're doing, and just get out there, and you'll be surprised how not easy, but how it's not as hard as you think. And it just unlocks access to so many amazing places.
Nice. Any piece of kit that turned out to be completely essential or useless even, I guess. It's just a little song.
On the first leg of my trip, I brought a novel to read at night in my tent, and it was a big, heavy hardcover. And I was so tired every night, I did not read. and I was just carrying this heavy book around, and I just left it somewhere where it stopped because I didn't need a book, certainly not a big heavy book.
E-reader or on the phone, I guess, right? So,
yeah, or just not. I was by the time
just sleep anyway. You're tired anyway.
Yeah, by the time because often I would get to wherever I was camp most of the time. So I'd get to where I was camping, and I'd have to set up camp, eat. I want to stretch. I had some note take or work to do, planning logistics for the next day. So by the time everything was done, I was ready to go to bed. Essential pieces of equipment. I did have a charge pack for my phone that was really handy. Right. So there were places with no power. And, again, that was kind of the way I was coordinating everything. That really came in handy. And I typically carried, I had a couple of 1 liter Nalgene's for water and sport drinks. Right. But then I also had, an 8 liter dromedary bag. And that really came in handy, when I knew I'd be going somewhere where there might not be water. So I had, enough water to rehydrate meals at night. And more importantly, to make coffee in the morning. Yeah, I needed my coffee in the morning, so I wanted to make sure. Yeah, so that was really crucial. But everything else was kind of just lightweight camping gear, right? I had a backup fin for the paddleboard, and that was essential because I broke the first fin just being careless with my board. Dropping it in the Hudson and clipping the side of the pier I was on, and just not being careful enough. So having, I had a backup paddle, did not need it, but just to be sure, those essential pieces, it's good to have an extra one just in case, as you probably know from boating trips.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people the same thing, to carry small equipment, look for camping or hiking equipment because it's all small. So that's the way to go, definitely. So
yeah. I had a little kind of 1-person tent, which was super small and light and cozy. I had a super light sleeping pad, a quilt, a pillow that was the size of a softball, not inflatable, just squeezes down really tight. And I guess useless equipment. On my first couple legs, I had a full set of long underwear in case it got cold at night, but it was like 35 degrees every day and 25 at night. So I actually mailed it home from New York City because I didn't think I'd ever be cold again. So I didn't need that. Yeah. Well, come September, my last leg heading up the Rideau, I needed, sometimes I was wearing everything I had in the morning and at night because the temperature days were sunny and warm, but the nights.
You did very long days. So,
yeah, my longest day was like 66 kilometers, I think, which was on the Hudson, assisted a bit because the Hudson River, below Troy, New York, the kind of the lower 150 miles is tidal. The tide comes all the way up. So, for some of that day, I had the tide with me heading out towards the ocean. So that probably helped my mileage a little bit, but it was July 4th. It was a sunny day, or it rained in the morning, sunny afternoon. And I felt like kept going and going. And I passed a couple places where I could have stopped, marinas who had said, yeah, you can camp here. And then I got to the marina kind of after 66K, just as a storm was hitting, and there were fireworks in the air. And then I looked back and realized that's lightning. That's not fireworks. So even after 14 hours or 15 hours of paddling, I had to go hard for the last mile to get to this marina. The wind was whipping around, and I left my board in the water with all the gear on it. I didn't want to bring it off the water, and ran into the closest building. And luckily, it was the bar. And they were closing, but they let me have a beer and hang out for a bit while the storm passed. So it was a perfect way to celebrate July 4th.
Perfect. Tell us about the physical aspect to it. Is it harder physically or mental, a little bit of both?
So I mean, canoers and kayakers may disagree, but I think it's easier, it certainly is for me, to stand and paddle for those long days.
You have to remember, you stand all day. It's not like
but it's your whole body, right? So it's literally from your fingers to your toes. It's mostly the core, it's the big muscles. So it's not necessarily your arms or shoulders doing most of the work. And you can constantly shift around. You can adjust your stroke. You can adjust your stance. You can stretch all the time. If you're again a canoe or kayak, you're sitting there. You're basically doing the same thing for 8, 10, 12 hours. I can't imagine how much my back or knees would hurt after doing that. But paddling allows you kind of the flexibility. You can jump in the water and cool off, so it's not as hard. I kind of compare it to walking. You can slow and steady, right? You can set out, go at whatever pace is comfortable, and keep going for a long time, probably, right? So paddling, to me, is kind of like that. Okay. The mental side of it, yeah. I mean, there were challenging moments, but sometimes you're kind of doing math in your head. So I have 12K to go today. It's this time.
Yes, you do that
I
all
want to
the
get
time.
there by that time.
Right.
So how long is it going to take me to get to that point? And you're kind of constantly calibrating and recalibrating just to occupy your mind. But then sometimes, and it's partially, I think, because of the paddling stroke is almost metronomic. It's kind of this repeat thing. It becomes really meditative. And,
Right.
I would be thinking about stuff, and then I would realize I'm not thinking about anything. And like an hour or two had passed, and I had made 8 or 9 or 10 kilometers, and I'm just kind of going. And then also, again, like with boating, like with canoeing and kayaking, and if you're in a beautiful place, you're often just looking at the water, at the trees, at the birds, at the animals, right? And
Absolutely.
it just you're out in nature on the water all day. Like where else do you want to be?
Right. There's runner's high. I guess there's paddling high too, right? You're in the zone, and it's fantastic. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, that you're in a flow state, right? You're just going, and there were points on the trip, both when I was paddling and when I was stopped, just having lunch or just kind of swimming, chilling in the shade, where it felt like I had always been doing this, and it felt like I was meant to do this. Like It felt like such a natural, perfect state. It just everything, the equilibrium was there, right? Everything felt right, and that's this harmony of body and mind and environment, which is for me often attained through outdoor activities like this or paddling in particular.
did your perspective change being in the water every day? Is that what you expected, or did things change about it after doing this or while doing this?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think I developed an even deeper appreciation for the small, simple things in life.
Nice.
Like a cold drink, whether it's water or beer. A shower when you really need it. Somewhere comfortable to sit at the end of a long day. Interesting people to talk to. So just the little simple things I really grew to appreciate. And I think just kind of reverence and humility, right? Like nature is a really powerful force, and we need it. We need to respect it. We need to take care of it. I think I've always been environmentally minded and want to leave the planet a little bit better state than I came into it. And I've kind of that's been re-solidified in my mind, that I want to do more to help the people and places around me heal from some of the destruction that we've caused. So I think it did change me, in a way, even though it's been almost 2 years now since I completed the trip. I'm still kind of on it, I'm still, and now that I'm talking about it a lot to people like you, and the book is out, I'm still kind of almost living the experience. Of course, I've done a lot of paddling since then, and I paddle a lot all the time, no matter where I am. So I'm still paddling a lot, obviously. But I think the experience did change me, and I mean, it's a big part of who I am now.
The book really does help you connect with awareness, community engagement, and so on.
Yeah, and that kind of emerged as the main theme of the book. I went into it. Yeah, like
you didn't go in thinking that way, I guess.
No, absolutely. Like I went in thinking blue space, water is mental health, is physical health. It encourages pro-environmental behavior. But what I realized that more so than all of that, I think it's a conduit to connection between people. And my thinking around that is, because it's good for our well-being, it makes us feel good, because it also slows us down. So, sure, there's some fast boats, but most boats go slower than cars. And certainly if you're paddling, you go slowly. Or if you're just hanging out at the beach or having a picnic beside the river, you're not moving, or you're moving slowly. So it makes us feel good. It lowers our pace. And then as well, I think the element of danger around water, we tend to watch out for one another. So I had people everywhere take care of me. People who were concerned about my safety, who were asked if I needed anything, who warned me about hazards, who told me to go talk to their friend in the next town because he or she would take care of me. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a combination of things, the goodness it does for us, the pace, and then this kind of communal looking out for each other. That's the real connection. And that leads to, I didn't have profound conversations with everybody. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I just kind of talked about the weather or talked about the place that I met somebody, about their town. And when I think about the challenges facing the world, I think climate change, is at the top of my list or near, but also a disconnect between people. And the fact that, when our interactions are mediated by technology or cars, it's not this face-to-face human thing. And when you're in blue space, it is. And that's the beginning of something, this connection. And you're never going to agree with somebody if you can't begin to have a conversation first and figure out who you are as people, right? So that happened time and time again. I had lots of interviews with people I had arranged in advance to meet up with, but then I met dozens of strangers, and so kind, so generous, so caring, so inquisitive and supportive. It just reaffirms that people are good no matter where they are, no matter who they are, no matter what you hear or think about them. You see somebody face to face by the water, most of the time, not always, most of the time, it's going to be a positive experience.
Right. Do you have a memorable encounter you can share that illustrates a little bit this unique connection that you formed through this?
Yeah. I mean, there was one town in the Erie Canal. I was paddling in the Erie. I met a couple beside the water. We were chatting, and I told them where I was going to stay that night. And they said, "Oh, we live there. When you get to town, why don't we come meet you? Nice. And we'll bring some food and hang out." I was like, "Great, sure. Sounds like fun." In towns on the Erie Canal, you can camp at the downtown river landings. You can also boat. There's places to tie up your boat. There's power sometimes. There's washrooms, and then cyclists and paddlers who are doing the Erie Canal or the trail are allowed to camp there too. Never had a problem anywhere. This particular town was a little rough looking. There were some people hanging around the park who looked like they had hard lives. Everywhere I stopped, I would set up my tent, leave my gear, go find a supermarket or a restaurant, no worries. In this place, I kind of kept my stuff in a pile, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then this couple showed up, and they brought, homemade cookies and nuts and fruit and a 6-pack, and we're just kind of hanging out, having a drink, talking. The sun is setting. And I asked them, "Is it safe to camp here?" And they said, "I don't know. Do you feel safe?" And I said, "I don't know." And they said, "I don't know either." And the woman phoned her brother, who lived right across the water. He was a retired tugboat captain. And he let me camp in his backyard for the night. So I just put my stuff on the board, paddled across. I didn't even see him. He had gone to bed, but he said, "Yeah, he's welcome to use my backyard." And I realized, as I was setting up my tent in the dark there, that, yeah, this was a friendly couple, and they wanted to hang out and hear my story and tell me their stories. But I think they were looking out for me. I think they knew their town, had its rough spots, and they didn't want a stranger, somebody they had no connection with, to have a negative experience in the place where they live. So they came, I think, purposefully to keep an eye on me, and they took care of me. And I could probably tell you 5 or 10 stories just like that. And it's people taking care of people for no reason other than just the goodness of their hearts, right? And that was really, really reaffirming and really wonderful. The other story I like is also on the Erie Canal, and paddling hard, end of a long day, tired, just want to get to an actual campground where I was going to stay. And I hear somebody yell, "Take a break, have a beer." And I looked over, and there was a marina, and there was a group of people on the back of the boat. And it's like, yeah, okay, sure. So I part of me just wanted to get to the campground and chill out. But I went over, and it was this guy, Matt Donahue, and his wife and their son and a couple of their friends. And they just welcomed me with open arms, and they helped me up in the boat and gave me a beer. And I sat and talked for an hour, and they told me all about their town, and they asked me questions, and they were so supportive and curious and encouraging. And Matt, the one thing he told me that really stands out is that he used to be a member of the U.S. Navy Seabees. So this is the U.S. Navy's kind of elite construction battalion. If they need to go somewhere and build a bridge or something like that, they send in the Seabees. And he said their motto is, "The difficult takes time, the impossible a little longer." And that really stood out to me, both for my trip down the Erie Canal, because I was about halfway done and had another 180 miles to go. But any journey, any change, the impossible takes longer. And then when I was leaving their boat, I reached over and Matt and I hugged. And, I was thinking while paddling away, like, we're 2 middle-aged men who've just met for an hour. Or else the 2 middle-aged guys hug. Like, it wasn't like back patting. It was a real hug. And that was just a genuine moment of connection. And it was just really, it still makes me happy to think about it today.
You also talked about crossing busy channels and managing traffic with larger vessels. I know in small vessels, it's always you pay attention to that. I imagine in paddleboard, you're probably like a kayak and canoe, probably even more. So you're probably more along the shore. So you're probably not as exposed to the the big power boats sometimes that don't slow down at all in wakes and so on. So.
Yeah, and that's part of the education and knowledge piece, right? Like I've paddled the Atlantic and Pacific and some big water, so just knowing that you're vulnerable and big ships, big boats take a long time to stop and might not see you. They have the right of way, so you're sticking to the shores. When you do need to do a crossing, you want to go perpendicular to the channel, to the lane. When I was in New York City, I went out one day. I had met online a paddleboarder who had done a long trip and lived in New York, and he gave me great advice. And then he hooked me up with the Manhattan Kayak Company, which is a boat club on the Lower Hudson, and they let me keep my paddleboard there while I was in the city. And so I met up with this crew, Paris, the paddleboarder, and then his girlfriend and one of their friends in kayaks, and we paddled out to the Statue of Liberty and around the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, wow.
But two of them are licensed guides, and they had radios, and they knew the traffic pattern. So they knew where the ferries came and went. They knew where the tour boats, what their routes were. They were in contact saying, hey, ferry terminal, we're crossing your lane. It looks open, just to let you know. And there's four of us paddled through. So that was crazy fun because, I paddled in busy places, nowhere as busy as New York City Harbor.
Right.
But then the next day I went out by myself. I wanted to paddle across to Hoboken, New Jersey for a couple reasons. And they had given me advice, but none of them were joining me. So I basically paddled a little bit further south in the Hudson to a safe spot and then headed out to the middle of the river, looked both ways again. There was nobody coming, and then busted across as quickly as possible. You don't want to be a problem, cause an accident, police to come stop you or whatever. So I was able to cross safely and come back safely. But that was because local people kind of gave me the lay of the land and told me what out to look for. And because I had done it with them beforehand. So I felt comfortable going out on my own. It was a thrill. It was really, really fun.
You still do a lot of paddleboarding?
Yeah. Well, last weekend I was in Thousand Islands National Park.
That's right. We missed each other apparently.
Yeah, so. We could have capsized each other.
There's a lot of boats that go fast in there. Actually, it's a bit annoying sometimes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I know like canoers and kayakers don't like the boat traffic. If I'm on my paddleboard and they don't have gear on it, I like playing in the waves and wake. You can kind of surf the wakes a bit. You can ride the waves.
I see.
I'm probably not going to fall. And again, I'm leashed to the board. I'm wearing my PFD, and the water's warm now anyway.
Yes.
So I don't mind the boat traffic. It makes it kind of fun, and it's a challenge, right? But it's so beautiful there. The water's so clear, and paddling or cruising around on the little islands. It's becoming one of my favorite places in Ontario, if not the world, for paddling. And I've been doing a lot of that. I surf on the standing waves we have in the Ottawa, so I've been doing a lot of that this summer, and that's really remarkable because most of the waves are only up in the springtime when the water's high. The one that kind of goes year round is right in the middle of the river. And I've only this season been able to get on it and stay on it consistently. And it's just a magical feeling. You paddle out, you drift down, you turn, and you kind of power onto the shoulder. And then you're carving back and forth, up and down on like a 3 or 4 foot wave in the middle of the river, in the middle of the city. It's really magical. And it's becoming one of my favorite things to do. And even though I did it yesterday and the day before, I'm kind of, maybe I could do it again today or tomorrow. And it's addictive and it gets in your soul.
Nice.
It's just a wonderful way to be in nature, be on the river, and to kind of figure out the balance on the wave and play with it a little bit. I understand why
like
surfers
you want to learn to surf. Yes.
Yeah, why surfers I have gone SUP surfing in Portugal, right, and got beat up and hurt and tossed around and humbled and realized how much I have to learn. So
it looks beautiful when you see it, but it's not easy.
Yeah. It's hard to surf, become an ocean surfer when you're 52 years old and you grew up in the middle of Canada, right? Right. The Great Lakes have nice waves sometimes, but it's not like the ocean.
Anything else we should cover that you want to share with our listeners?
I don't think so, Steph. I mean, I think, I guess maybe one thing that I realized on this trip is I'm on a paddleboard. There's, I met people on boats of all different shapes and sizes, and I felt a real kinship with boaters, right? And I haven't spent a ton of time around boaters, so it was kind of welcoming to a new community, and I felt a strong bond. I spent a lot of time at marinas, and grew to really love them. People were friendly and talkative, and most marinas let me camp there, and they had showers. Some of them had bars, and I really liked that culture and that vibe. And even here the other night in Ottawa, I just paddled to the Alma Marina in Quebec. Just paddled across, just over there for the evening. Paddled across, had my Gatorade, and then paddled back. And just being in the marina for a half an hour rest brought me back to the trip and brought me back to that kind of atmosphere. And it's when you're around the water, people are chill, and that's the world needs more of that. So
absolutely,
I different boats, but we're all on the same water. And just jumping back and briefly into research, one of the most interesting kind of tidbits in some of the blue space research comes out of this British guy, Matt White, who's at the University of Vienna now, and they did a study. And they found that if you expose kids to water, to blue space,
right,
they become environmental stewards. And they showed like 4 kids will pick up plastic bottles, but if kids who have been at the beach, 7 of them will pick up plastic bottles, right? So we think about the health of the planet and future generations. The best way to take care of it is to have kids take care of it, right? So getting a kid to the water,
great point,
and they have fun, they enjoy themselves. And then they want others to be able to do so as well, right? It's this important thing, and it just pays dividends down the road. But this is my religion too. So and thank you for your very kind words about the book. And you're right. You do something like this, you don't know who it's going to find and who's going to read it, and it's wonderful to find people who I don't know, who don't paddleboard, who somehow find the book and are drawn to the stories and the people and the messages.
What a very inspiring message. I would recommend everybody to read this book. It's not just about travel, it's actually very inspiring. And Dan himself doesn't care whether you buy the book or get it at the library, but the message is there for you to really absorb and spread, really. We only have one planet. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. Our next episode, we have somebody that loves sailing, but his wife not so much. So he had a solution, is to build a boat for both of them. Roy Schreier built a mini houseboat, and he's got a lot of great stories. So do come back for that episode. Thanks again for listening. Spread the word about small boat sailing. And last, seize your own adventure.